What do we know about the nutrients that are going to impact sleep quality? What do we know about what you're doing right before you go to bed? Are you waking up from hunger ever? Because we can address that and we can actually maybe get you an extra hour.
Raina Beugelink, who's today's guest, is undoubtedly one of the most incredible, kind, empirical evidence-driven people we've met. That the fact that she has such a niche experience and skill set where she applies nutrition, sleep hygiene to maximize first responders' health is second to none. Couldn't commend her enough, and I get nothing from saying that. We get nothing from saying that. We just want to commend the people doing amazing work to get the information out there to help first responders optimize their health, their careers, prolong it, have the most enjoyable experience. So please check out her services. Enjoy this episode. If you have any guests that you want to see, please message us. We're trying to get the best. We have a bunch of high functioning guests that make me realize how much of an underachiever I am in comparison to them, but they are so valuable to this profession, healthcare and beyond. And please subscribe and support the podcast any way you can. Please message us any topics, ideas that you want. And if you want to see more ads, go to the end of the episode where you see where I'll plug my app that I'm creating. I apparently have no hobbies besides creating an app that helps paramedics understand the reasons behind the medical directives, pathophysiology, pharmacology, and break this down as simply and intuitively as possible. Otherwise, please enjoy this amazing episode with Raina Beugelink.
Your amazing expertise, background, what you do.
Oh my goodness. So I'm a registered dietitian. Been working in private practice for about 13 years now. And I started out just in very general nutrition stuff. So whoever came through the door, we helped, whatever the issue was. So you kind of really had to be this jack of all trades, especially as a young dietitian. And that was always very intimidating, but you learned so much so quickly. And right after I graduated from university, I married my husband, who's a member of the RCMP. And so immediately we were into the shift work lifestyle, which I actually knew nothing about. Nobody in my family had worked shift work before. So that was all very brand new to me. And I really didn't actually think that much of it. And so as the years went on, I started working with other shift workers because they said, hey, we do that in our house too. Night shifts, here's some things I meal prep. And I just started helping people a little bit here and there with some of their shift work stuff. And then I started pulling a couple papers and looking into the research about shift work. And the more I did that, the more I panicked inside because everything I read was doom and gloom and risk of this disease is high and risk of this is high and your blood pressure is screwed. And I just thought, oh my goodness, I had no idea. And I'm a healthcare professional who has a degree in nutrition. And I've been talking to these people. This is in my own house, and I was clueless about the impact of working night shifts on our health. And so it was right after COVID when a lot of us did all sorts of crazy things and job transitions that I stepped into this world of shift work nutrition. And I fired up my own little practice and I started to pull together things that I was reading in the literature and the evidence and the stuff that we were doing at home that seemed to be working, or he said he found helpful, or whatever the case may be. But I tried to pull both that like tangible lived experience together with the research and started coming up with really practical, simple strategies for shift workers. And I have loved it. It's such an interesting area of science. And so I've been very specifically in this niche for almost 4 years now.
Why you love it so much? Because you can see the passion. And it's so cool to see that.
So the whole area of circadian rhythm and chronobiology as this kind of field of science, I just find that very, very interesting. Every time I read a paper, I kind of nerd out. I'm like, that's so cool. That's so interesting that our bodies are created and designed this way. And then the other thing that I love is that when I'm actually working with somebody and I tell them something and they're like, that's exactly how I feel. And I say, okay, now try this. And then they come back and say, it's better. I got a better sleep and I haven't gotten a better sleep like that in years or months or whatever they say. So I love that part of it too, where previously people who haven't felt seen and heard in their world and in their sphere of work are now like, you get it. Somebody gets it, and somebody understands the implications of what working these nights are. And so that lights me up inside when somebody says, I had this aha moment, or like, I feel better. My shift felt better. I felt better prepared, or I felt not as sluggish, or I got a better sleep after nights, which is so hard to do. So that's what I love. Both getting into a little bit nerdy, a little bit sciencey, and then just translating that into practical things that people can take away with, and it impacts their physical health.
So what I hear you saying, obviously correct me if I'm wrong, it's very operational. And I think that is so iterative and cool that you get to see that. I get to read these really cool articles and I'm going to apply it to your situation. Then when you come back, I get to see if you actually feel better. Because I could tell you, when I did shift work, I was literally probably a shade of myself of how bad I felt.
Yeah.
And just reading about all this stuff to prepare for this, like I was saying, and I told my wife I was probably like a 2 out of 10 of what I was, just because I would never get restful sleep. And it impacts everything, which we'll get into. If you think how the void that you didn't learn this in school, then you had to kind of deal with it, because from your husband and just from the clients and just from your interests, what did you see had the most impact on him or your clients?
Understanding that there is a window of time where your body needs to eat and can eat and should eat and like optimally digest food, and there's a window of time where that's not going to work nearly as well. And I when I first started working with shift workers and as a younger dietitian, I gave the worst advice. I feel so bad because um, my thought process is like, well, yeah, I guess if you're just sleeping during the day, then just wake up and have breakfast, and then a few hours later have lunch, and then yeah, that makes sense. At 3 a.m, have supper, and then go back to bed. And so that was the advice I was giving. And the more that we understand about how the body is designed to have an activity phase and have a resting phase, that's so not true. There's actually very specific ways and timings that we should and can be fueling our body so that the body can handle the food. It can balance your blood sugar levels well. It can clear fat out of the bloodstream, and it can actually digest and absorb the nutrients. So working with those windows of time was probably one of the most eye-opening things to me. I learned a lot about biochemistry and metabolism in school, but I didn't learn about the circadian rhythm and the timing. Nobody was talking about that specific to the third of the population that does night shift.
Because that's so unique that, like, very simply, you think the body has an on-off switch. It's okay, you're up during the day, you eat, and it's off at night. But then you translate it to, if I have a 500-calorie meal at dinner time, or if I have it at 3 o'clock in the morning, would that be very significantly different on metabolism? And it's like, yeah, you're not supposed to eat at that time. And everything's regulated, correct me if I'm wrong, by our circadian rhythm, which is dictated by light. And each one of our organ systems has different times and how they respond to everything as well.
100%. Yeah.
Because I'm sure you heard the adage of there is no calories at nighttime. But then you see anecdotally paramedics just eat a full pizza at like 3 o'clock in the morning, and you can see how sluggish and how terrible they feel. And that's commonplace.
Yep. There's so much going on at play when the brain is fatigued and when it's turned around and when appetite gets messed up. Because from what I've understood reading through the literature, is that shift work essentially simulates jet lag in the body. So the same symptoms that we experience when we like travel over to Europe and then fly back home, and you've got those couple of days of like, oh, what day is it? What time is it? Like, you're awake in the middle of the night, or you're starving at 2 a.m. and you're not hungry at breakfast time, and just all those weird things that happen. For some people, those are the symptoms they experience every single week as they flip-flop back and forth between days and nights. And so that doesn't get better with time. And I've had, people tell me that when they first started, oh, you'll get used to night shift, and it's fine. You get used to feeling tired, and you get used to this underlying level of fatigue that never goes away. But you physically don't get used to flipping back and forth between days and nights because of those jet lag type symptoms. And so that's not going to get better with time. That's going to get worse and worse and worse and worse unless we are proactive in what we do.
It's funny you say that, because I think I was around when I hit 25. My body was just, no matter what, if I went to bed at 9 o'clock in the morning because I was on an 8 to 8 night shift, I'd wake up at 12, no matter how tired I was. And I just felt perpetually tired. I couldn't sleep. I was that tired, wired. Then I also remember the inverse. If you do a long, like 4 nights in a row, that was the schedule. I remember vacuuming at 2 a.m. just because I couldn't sleep then. And I was like, this is eye-opening. This isn't good.
Yes.
This is not good at all.
Right. Yeah. It's fascinating how different people, I think, respond a little bit differently. And that's where I think your chronotype can make a difference, because the people who are more so on the night owl side of the spectrum, in my experience anyways, I don't have any like empirical evidence for this. I think they can handle nights a little bit better because they're naturally a little bit more able to stay up late and sleep in later. That comes a little bit more naturally to them. The people who are on the early bird side of the spectrum, night shifts are tough. Sleeping in during the day is actually really tough because their circadian rhythm signals to get up, get going, like start the day, those are very strong within the body, regardless of whether they have blackout blinds and a night mask and all the strategies that we should use for sleep hygiene. It's just harder for them, I think, to get good quality sleeps during the day. So sometimes we do talk about that specifically, is what side of that spectrum of the chronotype scale do you fall on? And if you're a night owl, those early day shifts are going to be brutal. Like you won't feel awake until like halfway through your shift, and then it's like, oh, okay, I'm here, I'm present. So and then for the early birds, the night shifts and sleeping in during the day is really brutal. So there's strategies that you can do to support both sides of those spectrums.
Okay, let's apply this to me because I love getting up early.
Yes.
And I was literally the guy that hated night shifts, like emphatically hated them. And I remember during the summer when you get home from a night shift, it's so beautiful out. And I was kind of tired, wired. I was like, I just want to go outside and I should sleep. And even trying all the sleep hygiene, I cooled my bed or my room. I had my night mask on, blackout blinds, but I still was up. And I was a perpetual zombie. So what could you recommend for me to optimize my sleep hygiene and optimize my chronotype to recover appropriately?
Sometimes in the nights when you're doing all the things, you're checking all the boxes, and that kind of is what it is. Sometimes that's the case just due to this trait that's in your DNA. So it's not like, oh, I'm a procrastinator, I'm an early bird. No, it's just like that's a DNA driven trait. That's not a personality thing we can try and work on. So that's in your DNA. So to some extent, the amount of sleep that you get is the amount of sleep. What I will often look at my clients is say, here, let's focus on what we can control. What is your diet quality like? What do we know about the nutrients that are going to impact sleep quality? What do we know about what you're doing right before you go to bed? Are you waking up from hunger ever? Because we can address that and we can actually maybe get you an extra hour in there. And then the other part that we look at is supporting your natural circadian rhythm, your timing, your natural melatonin onset, especially on your days off, so that if nights always create a sleep debt for you, like you need 8 hours and you constantly get 5 or less over those nights, where are we going to catch up for that sleep debt? Because if you're on the early bird side of the spectrum, you're probably going to be able to fall asleep a little bit earlier too, if you're not jet lagged and turned around all the time. So sometimes that can be the case, is that we actually say, hey, there are times where we could try a melatonin supplement and see, can we tell the body, here's one more signal to get ready to go to sleep? Because we know melatonin isn't everything. But that's often something that we play around with is, okay, try melatonin at this time because you're going to try and tell your body to go to sleep a little bit sooner to catch up and reduce that sleep debt that was accrued over your set of nights. So it's strategies like that. And especially for the early birds, you say you got to focus on an early bedtime on your days off because you're not really going to be able to sleep in. So therefore, you actually got to get it on the other side of midnight in a way. and try and give your body that chance.
So if we talk about like scheduling our meals around that schedule, like let's say I'm doing 6 to 6 days and 6 to 6 nights. When I'm like getting ready for my first night shift, that's I found like was the hardest day for me because it's like, oh, I can't nap very well. I'm having trouble like trying to get ready for that night shift. So I'm probably staying up from like 6 a.m. till 6 a.m. on those. So how would you recommend kind of your macronutrient balance period?
Yeah, that's such a weird, like, I kind of call it like a twilight zone when you're doing that shift change or long change or swing shift or whatever you call it, when you're transitioning from the days to the nights. And you're exactly right. For somebody who can't sleep in, or who really their body's just like, we're not napping, we don't do that. And so how do we stretch your food intake over that period of time? Because in reality, you probably have a higher energy expenditure because you are up and active throughout the night. So even though we might say, hey, your daily recommended intake is 2,200 calories a day, it does make sense that it's like we might actually need a little bit more than that because you are physically active for 24 hours, even though you've maybe already hit your calorie intake. I would still say if you are awake during the day, maybe we would shift your calorie intake a little bit later. So maybe everything maybe could move by a couple hours. But for some people, they're like, I'm hungry at 6 a.m. Like my stomach's growling. I'm ready to eat. I always want to respond to physical hunger. So then I might say, yep, normal breakfast, normal lunch, normal dinner. If we need those snacks in there just to be hitting our protein needs or to hit the macro goals that we want to, or if we are just working on portion control or hunger management or whatever the case may be, great, we can still have their snacks in there. Because we have that extra time where we are physically active, then I might build in a couple extra snacks. But I am careful about the timing, about how late we push that into. And it's always good. I think it's always a good strategy to have something on hand that you feel good about eating. Should you just like, this was just a crazy busy shift and I'm starving, then that's where we would absolutely have maybe something extra. So maybe you need it, maybe you don't, but it does create a sense of safety in a way when you say, I know I've got that in my bag, should I need it? And if I don't need it, it's fine.
To try to not disrupt it that much from like what a normal day would look like for you given your chronotype, sorry.
Is essentially the goal. And this is everything that I've seen over and over and over, is that we can tell your body what time it is by when you eat. And so if things fluctuate by a couple hours, that's totally fine. And that's usually what the chronotype kind of indicates. The early birds will feel better eating sooner. A night owl will not feel great eating at 6 a.m. That their gut's probably not even awake yet. And so night owls might have to wait a few hours. Same thing with early birds. If they're eating really late, they might experience more gut distress with a late meal. And night owls like, oh, that doesn't bother me. I can eat McDonald's at 2 a.m. No problem. No gut issues whatsoever. And so sometimes there is like meals can slide by a couple hours depending on your chronotype, is kind of what I've noticed the most.
So if we kind of go to the next day in that like shift that we're trying to manage there,
right,
which is like after the first night and before the second night, my challenge during that, we'll use it as a case study, I guess, is like zero hunger for the daytime at that point.
Okay.
Well, Ryan, which is like, oh, I get home at 7, sleep from 8 till 11, and then it's like the brain just wants to be awake. And then there's like that completely discombobulated feeling with no hunger.
Yep.
I don't know. Is there a way to kind of optimize that?
Yes, 100%. And when sleep is that short, like if I'm hearing you correct, like 3 to 4 hours, it's like that's almost like a nap. You know, like it's so not enough for the brain to go through the whole restorative function and the cycles and to clear out adenosine, which is where caffeine usually comes in. But I'm jumping ahead of myself. Maybe we'll circle back to that. So it makes total sense that it's like appetite is just like, oh, yeah, there is zero appetite when fatigue is sometimes really high. On the flip side, when fatigue is high, all we crave is carbohydrates. And like the good ones, you know, I never crave carbs from carrots when I'm tired. it's like, oh, there's a donut, or oh man, I could really go for just a really good Italian sub or something that feels just so indulgent and satisfying. So I'll walk you through what I would typically recommend in that situation. So say we'll go right through that swing shift. So eating relatively normal throughout the day, I might put in a couple of later snacks into the evening leading up to midnight. And then here's what the research recommends, especially for those night shifts, is that from midnight to 6 a.m., that is a great time to let your body fast and to let your gut rest, just as you would as if you were sleeping in the night, because that's the window of time when your body goes into the rest phase and it's not in the activity phase. So we don't have the same concentration of enzymes to digest food. We don't have the same ability of our digestive hormones, things like insulin, to pull sugar out of the bloodstream. And so anytime that we're eating there, the gut's kind of going like, what the heck is going on? Like, oh, I'm not prepared to handle this. And that can accentuate those symptoms of jet lag. And you get a feeling of sluggishness and just like bloated. And for some people, really strong gut issues. And that's one of the triggers for IBS in shift workers, is that eating during that kind of 6-hour thing. So that's a pretty key window to let your gut rest. And then if you have fasted during that period of time, having breakfast before you actually go to sleep. And I know that seems counterintuitive because we all have heard, like, don't eat right before sleeping, but that's applies to mostly nighttime eating. It is now we're technically back into daytime. And so now your gut actually is releasing the hormones and the enzymes to digest food. So even though you're going to sleep, having that, and it can be a light meal. It doesn't need to be crazy heavy bacon and eggs and hash browns and all the things. It can just be a smoothie or a yogurt parfait or something with some high quality carbs, something with protein. And that does two things for the body. So one, it confirms it's daytime. Yep, time to be digesting food. And two, it can actually help you get a better quality sleep because, again, there's less chance of hunger being the reason that your sleep is interrupted. Now, for you, you said, I don't have any appetite. I still wake up after 3 hours and there's no desire to eat, likely due to high levels of fatigue. In that case, I would be purposeful about saying, hey, I don't want to eat. I don't want to heat up leftovers. Like, nothing looks appealing. Sometimes we can take a liquid food route in that sense, so that maybe it's a smoothie and we can just blend up some things in a smoothie and just be sipping on it at what might be considered a quote unquote normal mealtime. So that if you wake up around noon, that's our classic lunchtime. Again, we're telling our body, daytime, this is the time to actually take in the calories. This is the time to digest the nutrients, even though my appetite is not there. Liquid will always sit a little bit better than a full plate of food when appetite is really low. So sometimes that's a strategy that can be helpful. And the more we eat sooner during the day, the less the cravings are towards the end of the day too. So that's very helpful from a craving management strategy.
Selfishly, I'm kind of happy you said this because anecdotally, when I started to learn and iterate my own kind of routine, I fasted during night shifts for that
Yeah.
reason. I tried to sustain my model based on I would have breakfast, then when I wake up, after unfortunately a couple hours, I'd have lunch, then I would have like a later dinner.
Mm-hmm.
And even during the night, I would maybe have like a late coffee, like 6 p.m. to 8 p.m.,
Yep.
then just water after that. And
Yep.
I did feel better. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember having partners, like you said, grab the sub at 2 a.m. or the pizza,
Yeah.
and you literally just see the IBS percolating. And you could see how sluggish they are. And they're like, you don't eat? And I was like, no, this is what I recommend. And I'll tie back into what you said about the carbs. We obviously crave the carbs, especially when we're fatigued and everything. And correct me if I'm wrong, shift workers are at higher risk of diabetes because of that reason. Because one, we're more insulin resistant at that point in time, and probably the excess calories during the nighttime kind of amplifies everything.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly it. We don't have the right release of insulin at night to clear those sugars out of the bloodstream. And again, and I always want to put a disclaimer in here. I don't have to work shift work. So I've done a couple of ride-alongs. I've done a couple of things. So I experienced, like, in a very short term period of time, the physical experience of that, and it was terrible. So thank you all for what you have done, because it's so bad. But what people have told me is like, yeah, I had everything packed that you said, but when I'm looking at my carrots and hummus at 2 a.m. versus somebody brought in a box of donuts, which one, and you're tired, which one do you think your brain is going to drive you towards? And so that's the other thing too, is that the types of foods that are the most palatable probably to us in that period of time are those really fast sources of sugar, very energy dense, low nutrient density, and probably a good source of fat too. So it's the brain wants those because it goes, oh, that's going to be so fast. That's probably actually going to release some endorphins too, so you feel good short term. And so that's part of the challenge of the risk of diabetes being high, is that the foods that we actually eat overnight are probably really simple carbohydrates that have a greater impact on your blood sugar, and you don't clear it out the same.
That's interesting. And I wonder if you've gotten this comment before, because I've always experienced this. The speed of eating on shift work. So, like, you literally just sit down, you get a break, and you just microwave your food, and the tones go up. And you just look at your food, even if it was healthy food that you prepared and meal prepped, you either have to put it away or you literally shovel it in and risk the indigestion that happens 5 minutes later. And I can tell you how many times I sat in the ambulance with a fake bib on, eating my cold food just to eat because I had nothing else. And how does that impact health?
Yeah, great question. And it in the world of first responders, that is so common. So my husband as a police officer, I saw that many times when he first started in his career. And we were in a small town, and he was the only one working. He would come home for supper on shift, and as this newlywed, I had all of these ideas, but I'm like, oh, we're gonna have this nice meal together, and he would crush it, and then go back out the door, and I'm still there, like, what just happened? And that's even to this day. He's a phenomenally fast eater. And I think that's a really common experience exactly because of what you said. I don't know when I'm actually going to get the next opportunity to eat. Or like you said, the tone went off again. And so now my option is cold food, shovel it in, whatever, put it back. And who knows when I'm going to get the chance to fuel next. The rate of which we eat absolutely will bring in some risk of indigestion. We're probably swallowing a lot more air. And it's just it could be a large volume of food that the gut needs to receive and deal with in a very short period of time. I think the biggest implication I see with fast eating, especially when you're not on shift, because I absolutely understand the need to eat fast on shift, but that always translates usually to home too. And so when we eat very fast and you just finish the plate, clear it right out, or finish your dish, there's very little time for the brain to receive fullness signals from the stomach. And that can actually be a process of 20 to 30 minutes to say, hey, I'm full, you can stop now. But I can pack away a lot of food in 30 minutes if I'm trying, so, and by then it's too late. Then I'm like, got to change into my stretchy pants, and like my stomach, I feel sick because of the amount of food that I've consumed. So if we don't have it portioned out and prepped and planned, and say I might eat this food fast, but I know it's an appropriate portion for me, and we're just eating to fullness and we're eating very fast, there's a really good chance we're going to overconsume at any one meal in time.
And that adds to caloric surplus, potentially excess weight over time, then the cyclical process. And this is a perfect bridge because you mentioned food prep. I know you've heard this, that you work 12 hours and not even including commute, not even including overtime. You get home, you have options. You can either wind down, potentially exercise, or meal prep.
Yep.
You can't really do it all unless it's going to take away from sleep. So what are the best ways to meal prep that's evidence-based and healthy?
Such a good question. And this is such a classic dietitian answer, but sometimes it depends. It depends on the person and their preference, because we probably have all had the experience where like, okay, that's it. I'm going to meal prep and I'm going to, like set stuff up in the freezer. And so a classic meal prep meal is like chili. So you make this giant vat of chili and you get 10 freezer meals out of it. And then you're on day 5 of eating your chili and you're like, I just can't do it anymore. I can't eat this. And then we end up going to grab something from a restaurant somewhere because it's just like, I just can't handle it. So the different experiences my clients have shared is like, I don't care what the food is. I can eat the same thing over and over and over. If I just have a portion and prepped and ready to go, that doesn't bother me at all. That would be scenario A. Scenario B is like, I don't like leftovers. I don't like the taste of reheated chicken. I don't actually like it when things are prepped and sitting in the fridge. I need fresh options. So whatever camp you're kind of in, and this is where you have to know yourself a little bit to say, how are we best going to utilize meal prep for you? And one of the strategies that I talk about often, and it's very simple and practical, but it actually fits very well, is this idea of like a bento box or finger food concept for one of your main meals on shift. So one might be your leftovers, yep, but then maybe this idea of finger foods that you can eat as you're driving, potentially on the way to a call. It doesn't need to be microwaved. It should be in a cooler or a good lunch kit of some kind, staying cool. That would probably be an important thing from a food safety perspective. But think about this as like adult Lunchables or charcuterie style stuff where you've got some veggies, you've got some crackers or pita, maybe there's hummus or tzatziki, maybe there's some turkey pepperoni sticks or cheese or hard-boiled eggs or even just pieces of chicken from some meal. And so things that you can eat on the go, but it has all of the components of a balanced meal, but it requires minimal prep, minimal cooking, and it can be stuff that's just stocked up in your fridge or your freezer or your pantry, and so it's a grab and go. And so that style of meal is actually very helpful, I think, from a meal prep perspective, because once you've got, okay, I can check off this box, my protein, my carbohydrates, my veg, a healthy fat, bang, 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 bang. And then you can throw it into the lunch kit within a matter of minutes is the goal. So that style of meal prep can actually be very helpful for one of your meals on shift. And then maybe the other one is leftovers from the night before. So I don't like the big cook meal preps. I've tried that and my experience is like, I just made a huge mess in my kitchen. I spent hours in the kitchen. Oh, and now I've got to turn around and cook supper. It was the worst. I didn't like it. And so I'm more on the camp of I'm going to cook a big meal for supper, even though there's 3 of us in our family. So my son's 7, so 2.5 of us, we kind of joke. So I won't cook for 2.5 always though. I will cook for 5 or 6. So that maybe there's leftover for the next day and I'll get a freezer meal or 2 out of that thing if that's appropriate. And so that's how I prefer to do the meal prep stuff is I'll just make a little bit more at the meal that I'm cooking so that I can get a freezer meal out of it. But I don't love the big cook thing. I've tried it, don't enjoy it.
I love that this is so operational and efficient because we've all done the big meal prep. I literally spent like 5 hours recently with my kids pulling up my legs, and you're mentally exhausted and drained.
Yeah.
To do that. And I put it back into the perspective that if I was still on shift work, I'd be demoralized right now.
Yeah.
Absolutely demoralized. And you'd be like, yeah, I'm just going to go buy some pizza when I get
100%.
there because it's so easy.
Yeah.
And just thinking about that, like, would you recommend an Instapot or like a slow cooker you can put in your macros, like a good quality meat, some veggies in there, put it in there, limited cleanup, and just let it cook and you can go with your day?
Totally. Yeah. All of the things. Whatever style of implementation you like for cooking, maybe it's your air fryer or maybe it's your Instapot or maybe it's your slow cooker. I like having 2 or 3 go-to recipes for each one of those things so that you can rotate through, you like it. Again, not every recipe that's great for meal prep is freezer friendly. So then sometimes it's finding these are some of my go-to freezer friendly ones. I know I've got some of these in the freezer, and then these are the ones that are a bit more fresh. And I can't freeze them, but so for example, it might be like some of those bagged salads we can get, like the creamy dill pickle ones or whatever. I like the ones that have a lot of like the shredded cabbage and kale and carrots and some really nutrient dense veggies in there versus just the leafy greens. And then we'll top that with rotisserie chicken or some sliced up leftover steak, or maybe I'll throw some roasted sweet potatoes on there from a different meal that we had leftovers from, or a can of flavored tuna or regular tuna or canned salmon or something like that. So it's things that I can just pull from the fridge and from the pantry. And then it's a pretty balanced meal that's come together quickly. So not freezer friendly at all, but I'm fully on board with somebody else helping me with the meal prep in certain areas.
Do you think a lot of these skills and thoughts to prep your meals, is it easy to obtain this knowledge? Because even though you went to obviously very rigorous education, a lot of it seems like people don't have the right pathway to go down. Like, this is how you could,
Mm,
and this is where I believe your services are essential. It's like you
mm,
got enough on your plate with shift work and trying to navigate all this, and it can be complicated, but
yep,
let me just help you show some low hanging fruit to solve this
yep,
problem.
yep. Meal prep is a legit skill. And I don't know that enough people like give it credit for that or give themselves credit if they actually are doing it very well, because we've all had the experience, like I said, of like you put a lot of effort and hours and like hundreds of dollars of groceries, and you're like, I don't even like this. This wasn't even good. I don't want to eat this 17 times in a row. And so figuring out those nuances is like a legitimate skill, and it's different for everybody because of their preferences. So when what you mentioned earlier was so gold, because you said you feel like you sometimes have to choose between sleep, your family, and meal prep. Which one of those is going to take priority on your precious 2 to 3 days off that you have while you're running errands and doing everything else in between? And so it's easy to see how the meal prep can be like, I can get food at Tim Hortons if I have to. Like there is a backup to that. There's not a backup to sleep or spending time with your family. So that's one that will often get chopped. But I do think that skill of meal prepping is something that is a trial and error based thing, absolutely. But it is something you can work on and something you can build. And when you're brain fogged, because that's another symptom of jet lag or shift work. And when I did a couple of ride-alongs on an ambulance, I remember standing in my pantry the next day, or I think it was even the day after. Like, I don't think it was that first day off from the night shift. I think it was the day after. And I could not for the life of me think of something to cook for supper, which is not usually that hard for me. I can be like, okay, I've got this and I've got this, and I can pull that together. But I couldn't do it. And I'm like, I can't, my brain feels foggy. This is what they're talking about. I can't actually pull those things together. And so that's where sometimes it is very helpful for somebody to say, don't worry about that. I'm going to map it out for you so you can see it. You're not trying to figure it out. And then it's just going to be, go get these groceries, put this in your lunch kit, give it a try. So it is very helpful sometimes to have somebody map that out for you. We have no shortage of knowledge. We don't have a knowledge problem with AI and the internet and like all the different things that we could do with our nutrition. Anybody could figure out what macros are going to feel good for them. But it's the translating that into our lunch kit and the timing of when to do that when you're jet lagged and brain fogged and fatigued and all that stuff. That's where it actually becomes very legitimate barriers to execution.
Let's say, I had my plan all sorted out for my first 2 days. I went and got through my first night shift, and now I'm going into my second night, but I have no meal prep. So I'm going to have to go buy something. What do you recommend that's usually available out there if you live like in a populated area?
Yeah, and that's the key.
That won't be grossly unhealthy for you.
Yes. Couple of key points. Where do you live? Where are you working and what is available? Because if it's like if you're doing this rotation in a small town or something like that, it's like everything closes at 10. Then is it like the gas station taquitos that have been on rotisserie for the last 9 hours? And sometimes that's all that's out there, and that's tough. But otherwise, if you are in a populated area and you got access to McDonald's and Tim's and whatever else is open late at night, then you can at least feel like you get a bit more of a meal. And so one of the things I've developed for exactly this situation is my fast food guide, where I've gone in and done like a deep dive on some of those nutritional menus and say, this choice is technically your best for maybe the balance of carbs and protein, and the sodium content will be the lowest on this one, or whatever the case may be. So say I would choose this from the menu, and I would choose this from the menu, and I would combine those things together, and that will actually give you the best balance out of that. And so that's part of figuring out the kind of nuances of that, because I think it's very unrealistic if somebody's working on their nutrition goals to say like, that's it, I'll never do a drive-through again. There will probably come a day when you need to, and that's okay. But we can be strategic about what happens in those scenarios so that you do feel the best coming out of McDonald's.
I think that's so operational and very useful for everyone. So hopefully go check out that fast food guide. So what I'm hearing is try to stick to your chronotype as much as possible. Plan your meals in advance if needed. Check out that fast food guide and damage control. So if we pivot to like caffeine intake, what would you think makes the most sense with like that kind of 2 days, 2 nights in terms of caffeine timing to maintain that kind of sleep architecture?
Yeah. One of the biggest things is figuring out like how quickly does caffeine metabolize for you? Because on average, caffeine will reach its half-life within 6 to 8 hours of consumption. So some people are really fast caffeine metabolizers and some people are quite slow. So that seems to be a genetic trait. So if you're somebody who can drink a pot of coffee and go to bed, it still might impact your sleep quality because the caffeine still might be circulating in the system, and fatigue just might be so high that it doesn't matter. Like you can sleep through a ton of caffeine. But that window of time of metabolism is one of the key things for the timing aspect of it. So I love my morning cup of coffee. I don't take that away from anybody. So if you like to have that in the morning upon waking, that's totally fine. There is a little bit of research to say potentially you should wait an hour before consuming caffeine, just with the hormonal changes that are happening. Blood pressure often spikes first thing in the morning. And so that extra caffeine may be beneficial to actually wait. That's hard to do. So I'm not always subscribing to that evidence, but could be beneficial for some people to do that. So then again, if you think about that 6 to 8 hour window of caffeine's half-life, so half the concentration of caffeine that you consumed is still remaining and circulating in the body and brain, then it might be beneficial to say halfway through your shift is I would have a second dose of caffeine. Maybe it's a little bit less, but it can help with getting through the slump of either that happens kind of early to mid-afternoon. That's a common time to feel energy levels crashing, or potentially that 3 to 5 a.m. And so if you had caffeine, like I said, maybe close to midnight, if you felt you needed it. If you don't feel you needed it, that's better. But if you felt you needed it, it might be close to like midnight to 2 a.m. So that by the time you get home by 6 a.m., you're in bed by 7 or 8 a.m., that caffeine should be at a much lower concentration in your body and won't impact your sleep quality as much.
Thinking, are there any other supplements that we could have to optimize recovery? And because I know I could never go without caffeine. And correct me if I'm wrong, there's benefits to it, but I'm just thinking, is creatine beneficial for muscle hypertrophy, cognitive function, or just other supplements?
Yeah, great question. Creatine is showing up so much right now everywhere. I think this is the golden child of the supplement world right now because it's being pulled up in so many different uses than our traditional understanding of it from a performance and muscle recovery perspective. So one of the interesting papers that I'd seen recently was on the cognitive effects of creatine, especially under the scenario of sleep deprivation, which is every shift worker everywhere. So they took these individuals and they were young, like healthy adults is kind of what this small sample size was looking at. So they put them under sleep deprivation. They made them stay awake all night. And as they did that, they gave them like puzzles and memory things and kind of put them through these different cognitive paces. And half of the group, they gave, I would say a bit of a larger dose of creatine. at 11 p.m. and then they put them through it. And then the other half of the group did not get creatine and then they had to do it. So the group that got the large dose of creatine at 11 p.m. performed better on the cognitive tests than the group who didn't. So that's pretty cool in the sense of like, if under the case of sleep deprivation and you still need to get up and perform cognitively the next morning or throughout the night, that might be one of the supplements that could actually be beneficial to us in terms of our recovery. I think melatonin can play a role in the recovery as well, in terms of saying, hey, on your first day off, you've just worked all night, maybe got a little bit of sleep, and now on the first day off, either people feel very tired and they can go to bed, or they get that tired, wired feeling that you're talking about. Potentially there could be benefits from some supplements containing maybe a melatonin and maybe a magnesium and a GABA component. Those can be helpful from a relaxation, a muscle health, so you're not struggling with a restless leg kind of feeling laying in bed, and then just signaling to the body that now would be a good time to go to sleep. So there are some supplements like that that can help in the sleep realm that aid you in your recovery.
Do you have a specific dose you recommend for melatonin? Because anecdotally, I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't even admit it. I would take an excessive amount
Right.
because I figured my receptors were so down regulated from my own like suppressing it that I had to take a higher dose. But then I'd wake up groggy.
Yeah.
I'd become even more resistant to it. Then to combat the brain fog I had, I would ask for like a pot of coffee at dinner time before I went into shift. My wife, who just started dating me at the time, looked at me with disgust, just shaking her head because she has a background in this as well. So, what would you recommend?
So what the recommendation is for melatonin is to start really low, like start at 0.5 to like 1 milligram of melatonin. That's tiny compared to some of the supplements that we have out there, because from what I understand, the body produces like picograms of melatonin, like very small amounts of this hormone. So when we are taking giant amounts, like I've seen supplements like 10 milligrams of this hormone melatonin, and that's way more than the body would be used to having. And so for some of my clients I've worked with, higher doses give them weirder dreams or more night terrors, and that's not helpful in the world of, especially in the world of first responders, where you already have a lot of trauma exposure. So that's what I would do. I would start very small and then work your way up. So if 0.5 or 1 milligram does nothing for you, then we could go up to 3, maybe up to 5, but rarely ever would I take somebody up to over 5 milligrams of those. Like if 3 to 5 doesn't work, then that's probably not going to be a super effective strategy for us all on its own. The other thing that's important to realize is sometimes the timing of it. If you take a melatonin as you're getting into bed and then you just lay there for hours and like melatonin doesn't work, it takes time. And so there's a slow release melatonin or there's fast release melatonins. And so if you want to be in bed by 9, you should maybe take your melatonin at 7, 7:30, 8 o'clock. Give it the time to be circulating in the system so that, and when you feel that drowsy feeling kick in, be ready to be in bed so that we can capture that window where melatonin may be then peaking in your bloodstream.
So it's not just the dose; it's also what type you're taking. Because that's funny. I remember just taking a couple drops, and hopefully, hoping for 10 minutes later, I'd be knocked out, that tired, wired again.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Are there hyper responders to melatonin?
You know what? I have heard people talk about this, and I haven't come across anything in the literature that way. But some people say when I take melatonin, I feel more jacked up. And so I don't know what that side of it is from a physiological standpoint. Is that a kind of psychological response, or is something happening there in terms of just taking a supplement and feeling like, okay, I'm waiting for it to kick in and we feel a bit more amped up with that. I would say in the world of first responders, I've never seen anybody hypersensitive to melatonin in the sense of I take it and it completely knocks me out and then I can't wake up for 3 days. I would say most people are jet lagged enough, or maybe even borderline shift work sleep disorder kind of category that it mostly doesn't have an impact. I would say it's the majority of people that I've talked with about that.
And you mentioned the cognitive side of things and the mental health side of things, especially with lack of sleep, because I'm sure most people have an appreciation that it's increased risk of cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, like you said, with shift work. But I think it's underappreciated about the mental health side of things. And obviously, first responders and shift workers are higher risk of stress-related disorders.
Yeah.
But can you tell us more about that and what are the impacts are?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things, as with a lot of things, a bit of a vicious cycle because we're you are exposed to trauma, you're exposed to stress-related events at a much higher rate than people who are not first responders or who don't work in that circle, in that community. So the amount of stressful events that I experience on a day-to-day basis in my life, I would fall into the category of like maybe 1 to 3 really traumatic events in my lifetime. Whereas that's not uncommon for an everyday shift for people who work as paramedic or firefighter or law enforcement or dispatch, emergency communications, anything like that. So the understanding of the accumulation of that is really critical, I think, to kind of say, wow, that actually adds up quite a bit. And one of the questions I'll ask my clients is when they talk about their stress levels, say, what is the impact of that stress for you on how you eat? Because for some people, there is very little connection between stress and the foods they crave or how they eat. But for some people, it's a really strong connection. And food is a great coping mechanism for stress. And I say great in the sense of it releases endorphins in the brain. It'll spike our blood sugar levels depending on what we eat. And you feel good in a very short-term capacity. And so that can be a great side of how food could actually maybe help us feel good. And I don't want to make that all negative about how food is a coping mechanism. I think that there is power to that, but when the negative outcomes of eating a certain way in response to stress start to outweigh that benefit, we need to make sure we've got other coping mechanisms in place. So there's a couple other things I want to connect to that too. Your gut and your brain are very closely connected. So under a state of stress, blood's going to be diverted away from the gut into the heart and the brain and the lungs to help you get through this emergency that the brain is perceiving. Again, really great physiological function. That's excellent. But I'm probably not having to run away from a bear. I'm probably just stuck in traffic late for a meeting in that scenario, and my stomach hurts because now I'm stressed. And so sometimes that's where we see a strong connection between gut health and our brain health or our mental health. The cycle here that I mentioned earlier is that the foods that you eat will impact your mental health. And so when we're under states of stress, again, I'm not reaching for carrots and broccoli and my tzatziki dip when I am feeling stressed out. I know I should, but I'm probably rummaging my pantry for that bag of chocolate chips that's there because of how quickly that energy is distributed to the brain and the endorphins that are released when I eat chocolate. So that helps me feel like I'm managing my mental health, or at least I'm doing something that my brain wants. What it doesn't help with is the state of your gut microbiome. And so when we eat certain foods, we are potentially negatively or positively impacting all that bacteria that's in your gut. And what the research is showing is that is one of the strongest protective indicators of overall inflammation, your gut-brain barrier, and how well your mental health is going if your gut bacteria is actually very healthy. So that's a whole area that's you could do a really deep dive into. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what the research is saying, the higher the ultra-processed food we eat. So ultra-processed foods is kind of exactly what you imagine. Packaged foods, fast foods, deep fried foods, all that sort of thing. If we consume a lot of that, our gut bacteria is going to almost be, the healthy bacteria will be decreased. We might get an overgrowth of unhealthy bacteria, and your brain health, especially anxiety. Anxiety is the one that shows up the highest with ultra-processed foods. our risk for anxiety and mental health concerns increases. If we're eating in a different dietary pattern, primarily Mediterranean, that's what always shows up. But just we'll say from a very generalized perspective, if we're eating more so in the Mediterranean style diet, that's actually much more protective from a mental health perspective. So it's so interesting how there can be that connection between stress, trauma, your diet, what your brain wants, what we're purposefully putting in, and on and on and on. So it's this whole intricate cycle that we could really do a deep dive into.
We were talking about this offline when you mentioned Dr. Andrew Huberman saying our shift workers sacrificing their health for the health of everyone else.
Yeah.
And talking about all that just proves it, because I always like to play this experiment, and you can apply this with shift workers. What's the one thing that would get you the best results downstream? And you probably start off with a good night of sleep, because if you sleep well, you get up, you can exercise, you have less cravings, you'll eat more healthy, you'll feel better, and mental health will be better. Then if we look at the inverse, our shift workers aren't sleeping. They're at higher risk of health pathologies because of the shift work, and then their mental health's exacerbated, and then they feel worse, and they're not eating, and that's making them feel worse in this cyclical process.
100%. Yeah. And this is the part that kind of breaks my heart, because nobody's like purposefully choosing to get a bad night of sleep. Sure, maybe we're on our phone a little bit longer than we should be or something like that, but man, it is what the schedule does to your body. And so I know a lot of shift workers who actually love their job, but they say, I feel like I have to choose between a job I love and my health. And that's really tough, because you've probably gone to school, you've trained for it, you've prepared for it, you maybe got a degree in something in order to be able to do this job that you love, but it sucks the life out of you, and your schedule dictates how good of a sleep you get. And that is exactly to your point, Ryan, is that will set off a whole chain of events, leaving you feeling totally out of control and stuck. And that's really unfortunate.
I just want to linger on that thread, because that's such a powerful statement to say. I'm like, that must be really hard to hear clients say that. I love my job, but it's essentially killing me slowly, and it's leading to all these comorbidities that could worsen my whole life. And now I have to choose, even though I may not have a choice, because I have bills to pay. I have a family to support.
100%.
That's
Yep.
hard.
Yep. Yep. It really is. And that's where maybe I'll circle back to the very beginning of our conversation. I love when you can give people like that extra 10%, that extra 20%. I feel 25% better than I did before, just from changing what I ate or when I ate. It's, again, I don't feel like it's weird, crazy things that we have to do that require a buttload of effort. Yes, food prep is always work, as we talked about. It is work, but it is actually some of these very simple things that can just tweak it enough to be like, man, I feel better. And that's sometimes just enough for the push to be like, okay, I can get a workout in because I feel better. And I actually got a better sleep because I started to work out again. And so we can slowly kind of crank the wheel back to get the cycle going in the right direction. And that is what I love.
Yeah, we want to be mindful of your time, but do you mind describing the services you provide? Because I want people to recognize and know the resources you have out there. Because correct me if I'm wrong, you're a certified dietitian, obviously in Alberta, Ontario, BC, and you can provide all these services virtually as well too.
Absolutely. I would say probably like 95% of my practice is virtual, in the sense of seeing my one-on-one clients. So yes, I'm registered pretty much across Canada with a couple exceptions. But I will do one-on-one nutrition packages as a big part of the services that I offer. And that's where we would sit down with somebody, we would chat about their work, their schedule, their life, what kind of foods they like, what don't they like, and kind of go through all those health details. And then we'll build them a custom nutrition plan, because there's, again, so much out there. You could Google a bajillion recipes and meal prep ideas and stuff, but it rarely fits in with your schedule and what you're looking for. So that's what we do. We really customize it to somebody's schedule and preferences and the culture and everything, so that it's tailored to them. And then we'll go through our follow-up sessions together after that plan has been implemented and say what's working well, what's not working well. And maybe we'll spend topics talking about, here's some stress management strategies. Here is craving management. Here, we're going to talk about maybe they're training for a half marathon while they're working shift works. And we talk about performance nutrition strategies. And so the follow-ups are really built to build agency, build efficacy, give them strategies so they understand really how to fuel their body in different scenarios, and then they can run with it. So some people will continue to see me a month at a time, and it just provides that extra accountability ongoing as life changes and seasons change. So that's a big part of the services that I provide, and I love that work. The other side that I do quite a bit, and this is kind of picking up a little bit more, is some of the corporate education for the organizations that are training police officers and are training firefighters. And so or nurses or oil and gas workers, and they're providing kind of a little bit more group education for somebody who's maybe stepping onto a frontline operator position, or they've done it for years. So I do a lot of presentation and corporate education work too, which I also love. So
now, as Jacob said, you're doing incredible work that is very operational and very much needed in this world. So where can people find you?
I'm on Instagram at Shiftwork Dietitians, or on my website at shiftworknutrition.com.
And what's the last thing you can leave listeners that could provide outsized returns on their health? What do you think is the number one thing they should focus on?
Timing, meal timing. Focus on eating more during the day, letting your gut rest at night. That is by far one of the biggest returns, like for long-term and short-term benefits that I've seen with my clients.
If you found this valuable, please like and subscribe. This helps us to continue to have high-quality, evidence-informed conversations for our paramedics and clinicians. Additionally, Charlie Meals, so it's this Whippy-based company that honestly customizes meals each week. You go on the website, you get to pick your meals based on your nutrition goals, your preferences, and they even deliver to your house. And people always laugh at me that I have such a high caliber taste, apparently, that I will either eat at 3 Michelin star restaurants or just rice cakes. It's nothing in between. And honestly, I genuinely couldn't recommend Charlie Meals enough, especially for busy families, for shift workers, when it's extremely hard to help prepare and have nutritionally dense food that's actually taste palatable. They do it, and they deliver to your house, and they last a long time. They can be put in the freezer and reused. There's the website in the description below, and as well as the link towards it, so please check it out. Additionally, I have built an app. Isn't that fun? So basically, I've seen over the years how the scope of practice of paramedics is rising. The amount of information is also escalating, and the time to do it is kind of condensed. So you can see the problem with that. And honestly, I just tried to simplify pharmacology, pathophysiology, very content-dense topics, and break it down as simply as possible, but also with the nuance of making it as operational as possible, because that's all adult learning. It has to be relevant to your everyday needs. So it's basically a clinical platform that you understand the medical directives, you understand the reasoning behind the medical directives, and how that actually connects to pathophysiology, pharmacology, and other high-tier concepts. And we break this down into scopes of practice. We break it down to that could be simplified for a beginner, for a more intermediate person, for an expert, every layer. And the more you put into it, the more it understands you and your reflection upon your critical thinking and how you actually make decisions. And it'll just feed higher back returns into you. So it's this outsized return. The more you put into it, the more you get back and understand your decisions and how that's relevant to everyday practice. I'm going to put it on the App Store soon. It's in beta phase. Please check it out. And honestly, if you have any ideas that you want to see into it, please let me know, and I'll try to integrate it, because it's all built on the user in mind, because that's truly what matters. Lastly, we highly recommend Casper, which is the Canadian Ambulance Service Paramedicine Research Repository. It was created by Dr. Alan Batt and his amazing colleagues to give free, open access research repository dedicating to fostering the open science and overall bolstering the visibility of paramedic research and any empirical evidence, and overall just information that can help increase the awareness of what's going on in the paramedicine world and shining a light on those shaping the profession at large, whether it's across Canada, in Ontario, or across the world.
This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not medical advice, does not establish a standard of care, and must not be used to diagnose, treat, or manage any medical condition or emergency. The content discussed reflects general principles that may not apply to every situation, system, or patient. Clinical practice varies by region, service, and jurisdiction. Always follow your local medical directives, clinical guidelines, protocols, and the instruction of your medical oversight or base hospital physician.